Her stepsister mocked her for marrying a Crippleman-Only to find out he's the Alpha King. I married a man everyone pitted, and my stepsister made sure the entire kingdom knew what a pathetic choice I'd made, until the night he caught an assassin's blade with his bare hand, and I saw his eyes burn like liquid silver. The cane was a lie, the weakness was performance, and the sickly duke I'd wed was actually the Alpha King hiding in plain sight for 12 years. My stepsister thought she was orchestrating my humiliation when she hired those men to attack me at the ball, but she was actually a pawn in a conspiracy that goes straight to the throne, and now I'm standing in a war room, married to the most dangerous man in the realm, with enemies closing in from every direction. The woman who mocked me is broken, but the real threat? It's still out there, and it knows exactly who I am. When your own blood laughs at your choices, the humiliation doesn't just sting, it brands itself into your soul. That's what Leora Valen learned the night she announced her marriage. She discovered long ago that cruelty had many faces. There was the casual dismissal in her father's eyes when she entered a room, the deliberate exclusion when her stepmother planned family gatherings, the thousand small cuts of being forgotten, overlooked, rendered invisible in her own home. But mockery, open, gleeful mockery from family, that was a special kind of pain. It didn't creep in quietly like neglect. It announced itself with laughter, sharp and bright as broken glass, and it left scars that no one else could see. Leora had learned to carry those scars with whatever dignity she could salvage. And tonight, standing in the grand dining hall of the Valen estate with 3 pairs of eyes fixed upon her, she would need every ounce of that hard-won composure. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into tonight's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. Thank you so much. Now, let us return to our story. The dining hall had always intimidated her, even as a child. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow above ancient iron chandeliers. Candlelight flickered against cold stone walls, casting dancing shadows that never quite reached the corners. The long table could seat 30, but tonight only 4 places were set, clustered at one end like a mockery of intimacy. Lord Castor Valen sat at the head of the table, his once handsome face now jowled and florid from too much wine and too little purpose. To his right sat Lady Morgana, Leora's stepmother, her beauty preserved through expensive oils and rigid corsetry, her expression perpetually calculating. And across from Morgana sat Calith, golden-haired and luminous, everything Leora was not, the jewel of the estate, the favored daughter, the one whose every whim became the household's command. Leora stood at the foot of the table, her hands clasped before her to keep them from trembling. She'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in her room. The words were simple. The decision was made. All she had to do was speak. "I've accepted Duke Ravian's proposal of marriage," she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "The ceremony will take place in 3 days." For a heartbeat, silence filled the hall. Then Calith's laughter shattered it. It wasn't a polite titter behind a raised hand. It was full-throated, genuinely amused, the kind of laugh that said the joke was simply too delicious to contain. Calith's head tilted back, candlelight catching the perfect column of her throat, her golden ringlets bouncing with each peal of mirth. "The cripple?" Calith gasped between laughs, pressing one delicate hand to her chest as if to contain her amusement. "You're actually marrying him? The man who can barely walk without his cane? The duke who whispers instead of speaks?" "Oh, Leora." She dissolved into fresh giggles. "How deliciously desperate you must be, dear sister." Heat flooded Leora's cheeks, but she kept her chin up, her gaze level. She'd expected this. Prepared for it. That didn't make it hurt less. "Duke Ravian is a respected nobleman," Leora said quietly. "He's been nothing but courteous." Courteous. Calith dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, her laughter finally subsiding into amused breathlessness. "Yes, I imagine he's very grateful for your charity. A plain, aging spinster willing to play nursemaid to a broken man. How noble of you both." "Calith." Lady Morgana's voice held a note of warning, though her lips curved in barely suppressed amusement. Do show some decorum. Forgive me, mother. Calith's smile was anything but apologetic. She turned her bright gaze to Leora, and something cruel glittered there beneath the beauty. I'm simply surprised, that's all. I'd heard the Duke was seeking a wife, but I assumed he'd want someone who could, well, enhance his standing. Not someone who'd be mistaken for the household staff. Lord Valen cleared his throat, finally stirring from his wine-induced lethargy. The Duke's offer is acceptable, he said, not quite meeting Leora's eyes. He never did. His lands border ours. The connection will be advantageous. Translation: Ravian's dowry offer had been generous enough to ease the Valen estate's mounting debts. Leora had seen the ledgers. Her father left them scattered carelessly in his study, never imagining his overlooked daughter might be literate enough to understand them, or curious enough to look. The estate was drowning in debt. Had been since her father's ill-advised investments in a failed mining venture 3 years ago. They maintained appearances with increasingly desperate measures, fewer servants, cheaper wines served in expensive decanters, her stepmother's jewels quietly sold and replaced with paste copies. Leora's marriage to Duke Ravian, with his substantial northern holdings and rumored wealth, was a lifeline her father couldn't afford to refuse. No matter how broken the man might be. How generous of you to approve, father, Leora said softly. He waved a dismissive hand. The arrangements are made. Don't embarrass us at the ceremony. Yes, Calith added, her smile sharp as a blade. Do try to look less like you're attending a funeral and more like a blushing bride. Though I suppose that will be difficult, given the circumstances. She paused, tilting her head with false sympathy. Tell me, sister, have you actually seen the Duke walk? They say he can barely make it across a room without stopping to rest. I do hope you're prepared for a marriage that will be more companionship than anything else. The implication hung in the air, crude and cutting. Lady Morgana made a small sound of reproach, but her eyes danced with shared amusement. Leora's fingers tightened around each other, nails biting into her palms. I'm quite prepared for marriage, thank you. Of course you are. Calith lifted her wine glass in a mocking toast. After all, what choice do you have? You're 24, plain as porridge, with no prospects and no dowry. A crippled duke is probably the best offer you'll ever receive. I suppose we should be celebrating your good fortune. We should, Lady Morgana agreed, though she didn't reach for her own glass. It's time Leora had her own household to manage. She's been underfoot for too long. Underfoot. As if Leora hadn't spent the last 6 years managing the household staff her stepmother neglected, organizing the accounts her father ignored, keeping the estate running while being treated as little more than an unpaid servant. Then I'm sure you'll be relieved to see me go, Leora said evenly. Devastated, Calith said, pressing her hand to her heart with theatrical sorrow. Who will reorganize mother's closets and inventory the linens? Who will sit in the corner at gatherings, making the rest of us look better by comparison? She laughed again, lighter this time, already losing interest. Still, I suppose every family must make sacrifices. Yours is simply more sacrificial than most. Lord Valen pushed back from the table with a scrape of wood on stone. This conversation is finished. Leora, the Duke's household will collect you in 3 days. Be ready. He paused at the doorway, still not looking at her. And try not to shame us more than necessary. Then he was gone, Lady Morgana gliding after him in a whisper of silk. That left Leora alone with Calith, who studied her over the rim of her wine glass with undisguised amusement. You know, Calith said conversationally, I almost pity you. Almost. She stood, smoothing her skirts with practiced grace. But then I remember that you're choosing this. You could stay here, fade quietly into spinsterhood like a sensible person. Instead, you're binding yourself to a broken man out of some desperate bid for, what? Dignity? Freedom? She laughed softly. Oh, Leora. You'll have neither. Just different walls and a husband who can barely stand without assistance. She swept past, pausing just long enough to add in a whisper. Sweet dreams, sister. I hope they're more pleasant than your reality will be. Then Leora was alone in the vast dining hall, surrounded by guttering candles and lengthening shadows. Her hands were shaking now. She let them. There was no one left to see. Let them laugh, she thought, the words becoming a mantra. Anything is better than remaining here. She'd seen Duke Ravian only twice. The first time had been at a minor nobles gathering 3 months ago, a brief glimpse of a tall man with dark hair and darker eyes, moving slowly through the crowd with a black cane, speaking in low tones that never carried. The second time had been when he'd come to formally request her hand, meeting with her father while she waited in the hall like a piece of furniture being appraised. He'd emerged from that meeting and looked at her, really looked, meeting her eyes when everyone else looked through her, and said simply, I hope this arrangement will be acceptable to you, Lady Leora. Not a declaration of love. Not false promises. Just a quiet question that acknowledged she was a person who might have an opinion. She'd said yes. Now, 3 days before her wedding, she climbed the narrow servants' stairs to her small room in the East Wing. Not the family wing, of course. That had been made clear when her father remarried. The new family needed space, and Leora had been relocated to quarters barely larger than a closet, with a single window that overlooked the estate's rear courtyard. But tonight, that window showed her something unexpected. A carriage stood in the courtyard, black and unmarked save for a small silver insignia on the door that she couldn't quite make out in the darkness. The Duke's carriage, perhaps? But why would he come so late, 3 days before the wedding? As she watched, a figure emerged from the shadows near the stable. Leora's breath caught. The man moved across the courtyard with fluid, predatory grace, long strides, perfect balance, the kind of controlled power that spoke of coiled strength. For 3 full seconds, he moved like a wolf, like a warrior, like something infinitely dangerous. Then, as he neared the circle of torchlight, he seemed to catch himself. His gait changed, became careful, and measured. He reached for something, a cane, and his entire bearing transformed. Shoulders curved inward. Steps shortened, hesitant. By the time he reached the carriage, he was the Duke Ravian she'd glimpsed at that gathering. Frail, careful, broken. But Leora had seen those 3 seconds. Had seen what he was when he forgot to pretend. For just a moment, she thought, her pulse quickening with something that wasn't quite fear. He moved like a predator. The carriage door closed. The driver snapped the reins. And as the vehicle rolled away into the night, Leora stood frozen at her window, her mind racing. Who or what had she agreed to marry? And perhaps more importantly, what was the Duke of the Northern Borders hiding behind his mask of weakness? 3 days, she thought. In 3 days, she would find out. The price of shadows, indeed. The chapel at Valen Estate had witnessed 3 generations of marriages, christenings, and funerals. Its stone walls held echoes of vows spoken in joy, in duty, in desperation. Today, Leora suspected her wedding would fall firmly into the latter category, at least in everyone else's eyes. She stood in the small antechamber off the chapel's nave, studying her reflection in a tarnished mirror that had belonged to her mother. The wedding gown was simple, cream silk with minimal embroidery, borrowed from a cousin and altered to fit Leora's smaller frame. No veil of imported lace, no train of crushed velvet. Nothing that might suggest this was a celebration rather than a transaction. Lady Morgana had made that clear when she'd presented the dress 2 days ago. No point in extravagance, she'd said, her tone almost sympathetic. Almost. Save that for brides who have something to celebrate. Through the chamber's narrow door, Leora could hear the assembled guests taking their seats. Not many. Her father had kept the ceremony small, inviting only those whose attendance was politically necessary. Minor nobles from neighboring estates, a handful of distant Valen relatives, a few of the Duke's associates who'd traveled from the north. And Caliph, of course. Who would miss this for nothing in the world? Leora's hands smoothed down the silk of her skirt, then stilled. They were trembling again. She'd thought herself past that, though 3 days of mental preparation would have armored her against the whispers and stares awaiting her in that chapel. She'd been wrong. "My lady." A servant girl poked her head through the door, barely concealing her pity. "They're ready for you." Leora nodded, drew a breath, and stepped into her future. The chapel was smaller than she remembered. Narrow pews lined a central aisle that seemed to stretch for miles beneath a vaulted ceiling. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting more shadow than light. The air smelled of beeswax, old stone, and the cloying sweetness of the white roses that someone, certainly not her stepmother, had arranged near the altar. Every head turned as she entered. And there, in the front pew, sat Caliph. Her stepsister had outdone herself. The gown she wore was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk and silver embroidery, cut to showcase her figure while remaining just barely appropriate for a wedding guest. Sapphires glittered at her throat and ears. Real ones, Leora noted, not the paste copies her stepmother had been forced to wear lately. Her golden hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken her maid hours to perfect. She looked like a queen attending a scullery maid's wedding. The contrast was deliberate, devastating, and entirely expected. Leora kept her eyes forward and continued down the aisle. At the altar, Duke Ravian waited. He wore black, severely cut, with no ornamentation save a single silver pin at his collar. The color should have made him look funereal, but instead it highlighted the stark planes of his face, the darkness of his hair, the pale intensity of his eyes. He leaned heavily on his cane, his weight shifted to favor his right leg, his shoulders curved inward as if the effort of standing was nearly too much. But Leora couldn't forget what she'd seen 3 nights ago. Couldn't unsee that moment of predatory grace in the courtyard. As she reached the altar, he extended his hand to help her up the single step. Their fingers touched. The strength in his grip shocked her. For just an instant, his hand closed around hers with a power that spoke of calluses earned through weapons training, of bones and sinews conditioned for violence. She felt the roughness of his palm, the controlled force in his fingers. Then, just as quickly, he gentled his hold. His hand became careful around hers, almost tentative, as if he feared his very touch might bruise her. Leora's eyes snapped to his face, found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he turned toward the priest, and the moment passed. The ceremony itself was mercifully brief. The priest, an elderly man who'd known Leora since childhood, spoke the traditional words with practiced efficiency. Ravian's responses were quiet, barely audible beyond the first row of pews. Leora's voice was steadier than she'd expected, though she heard it shake on the word, honor. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest concluded. "May the gods grant you strength in the years to come." Strength. Not happiness, not prosperity, not love. The priest, at least, was honest about what this marriage would require. Ravian turned to her. Protocol demanded a kiss to seal the union. She saw him hesitate, clearly uncertain, and something about that hesitation, the first crack in his careful composure, made her brave. Leora rose onto her toes and pressed her lips briefly to his. It was chaste, appropriate, over in a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, she felt heat. Not the tepid warmth of obligation, but something deeper, banked like coals beneath ash. Then she stepped back, and they turned to face the assembled guests as husband and wife. The applause was polite. Barely. The reception was held in the same dining hall where Leora had announced her engagement 3 nights ago. Long tables had been set with the Valen estate's finest remaining silver, the pieces her stepmother hadn't yet sold. Wine flowed, though Leora noticed it was the cheaper vintage, and servants circulated with trays of food that looked more impressive than it tasted. Another economy. Another crack in the facade. Leora sat at the high table between her new husband and her father, watching guests cluster in small groups, their laughter a bit too loud, their glances in her direction a bit too frequent. She knew what they were saying, could practically hear the whispers without needing to move closer. Poor thing. Married to a cripple. At least she'll have his money. If he lives long enough. I gave it a year before she's a widow. Less if she's unlucky. Ravian sat beside her in silence, barely touching his food. His cane rested against his chair, visible to everyone. a constant reminder of his weakness, his dependency, his fundamental unsuitability as a husband. Yet Leora noticed things the others missed. The way his eyes tracked every movement in the room. The way his fingers drummed once, twice against his goblet when Lord Theron, a florid nobleman from the Western Territories, made a particularly crude joke about wedding nights. The tightness around his mouth when someone laughed just a bit too loudly. He was aware, intensely, perfectly aware of every slight, every mockery, every pitying glance. He simply chose not to react. Then Caliph rose to give a toast. She stood with practiced grace, her goblet raised, her smile radiant. The room quieted immediately. Everyone loved Caliph. She was beauty and charm personified, and when she spoke, people listened. "To my dear sister Leora," Caliph began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "And to her new husband, Duke Ravian." Polite murmurs of agreement rippled through the guests. "I must confess," Caliph continued, her tone warm and intimate, "when Leora first told me of this match, I was surprised. After all, my sister has always been so practical, so sensible, not given to romantic flights of fancy, like some young girls." She paused for the light laughter this earned. "But then I understood. This isn't a romance, is it? It's something far more admirable." Leora's hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. She knew that tone, knew what was coming. "This is charity," Caliph said, her eyes glittering with false warmth. "My sister has always had the most generous heart. Who else would look at a man diminished by illness or injury and see not limitation, but opportunity? Who else would willingly take on the burden of caring for someone who requires such constant assistance?" More laughter now, less polite. Someone in the back made a comment Leora couldn't quite hear, but the crude laughter that followed made its nature clear. "So I raise my glass," Caliph said, "to Leora's charitable heart, to her willingness to care for the unfortunate, and to Duke Ravian, who has found in my sister exactly what he needed, a devoted nursemaid who comes with the title of wife." She smiled brilliantly. "May you both find exactly what you deserve in this union." The words hung in the air, poisonous beneath their sugared coating. Guests raised their goblets uncertainly, not sure whether to laugh or cringe. Lord Valens stared into his wine. Lady Morgana hid a smile behind her hand. "And Ravian?" Leora glanced at her husband. His expression remained neutral, almost placid. But she saw it, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. The way his eyes darkened from gray to something closer to black. The way his fingers curled around his goblet with enough force that she feared the stem might snap. For just a heartbeat, she glimpsed something cold and dangerous behind his careful mask. Then it was gone. He raised his goblet in acknowledgement of the toast, his smile mild, and drank. But Leora had seen. And she understood, suddenly, that Caliph's cruelty hadn't landed on someone weak and helpless. It had landed on someone very, very dangerous who was choosing, for now, not to retaliate. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it kindled something uncomfortably close to satisfaction. The carriage that would carry them to Ravian's northern manor waited in the courtyard as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Black and unmarked save for that silver insignia Leora still couldn't quite make out, a wolf's head, perhaps, or a crown or both. Servants loaded her few trunks. She didn't have many belongings worth bringing, while Leora stood in the courtyard, taking what she assumed would be her last look at the Valen estate. She felt nothing. No nostalgia, no regret. Just a vague sense of relief that this chapter was closing. "Ready?" Ravian's quiet voice came from beside her. She turned to find him watching her with those peculiar gray eyes, his expression unreadable. "Yes," she said simply. He gestured to the carriage door, which a servant held open. Leora gathered her skirts and climbed inside, settling onto the padded bench. A moment later, Ravian followed, moving with exaggerated care, using his cane for support. The servant closed the door, sealing them into the sudden intimacy of the carriage's interior. The driver clicked his tongue. The horses started forward. And just like that, Leora left behind everything she'd ever known. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ravian sat across from her, his cane between his knees, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. In the fading light, his profile looked carved from stone, all sharp angles and shadows. "I apologize," he said finally, his voice still quiet but somehow carrying more weight in the enclosed space, "for the spectacle. I know today was difficult." Leora studied him carefully. "You have nothing to apologize for." Your sister seemed to enjoy herself. There was something in his tone, not quite anger, not quite amusement. Something darker and more controlled. "Caliph always does," Leora replied. "She finds entertainment in cruelty. It's her particular gift." Ravian's lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. "She's not alone in that. I've noticed it's a common pastime among certain circles." He turned from a window to look at her directly. "They will always underestimate us, you know. People like your sister, like those guests. They see what they expect to see, and they never look deeper. And what do they see when they look at us? A cripple and his plain, desperate wife." He said it without emotion, simply stating facts. A marriage of convenience, at best. A mercy at worst. Leora absorbed the words, the casual way he spoke them, as if they couldn't hurt him. Perhaps they couldn't. Or perhaps he'd simply built walls too high for casual cruelty to scale. "Sometimes," Ravian continued, his eyes holding hers, "that's the greatest advantage." She blinked. Advantage. Being underestimated. His smile returned, sharper now, with an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. "When people assume you're weak, they stop guarding against you. They speak freely in your presence, plot openly, reveal themselves without realizing it." He tilted his head slightly. "A wise man once told me that the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you're carrying." Leora's heart began to beat faster. This was not the voice of a weak man. Not the careful, soft-spoken Duke who'd whispered his vows in the chapel. This was something else entirely. "And what weapon are you carrying, Duke Ravian?" For a long moment, he simply looked at her. The carriage rolled through the countryside, and the dying sunlight caught his eyes, turning them from gray to silver to something almost luminous. "The truth," he said finally. "And patience. And the absolute certainty that those who laugh today will have very different expressions tomorrow." It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But it was a promise, delivered with quiet conviction that made Leora believe him absolutely. She should have been frightened. Should have questioned what kind of man she'd married, what kind of game he was playing. Instead, she found herself leaning forward slightly. "You let them mock you. Let them think you're weak." "Why?" "Because I am weak," he said. "In public. Where it matters for people to believe it." His eyes held hers. "But we're not in public anymore, are we, Leora?" The use of her name, without title or formality, felt intimate in the enclosed space. "No," she whispered. "We're not." "Then perhaps," he said, "we can dispense with certain pretenses. At least with each other." "What pretenses?" "That this marriage is a mercy. That you're desperate and I'm grateful." His lips curved. "We both made strategic choices. You needed escape from a home that had become a prison. I needed—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Let's say I needed certain arrangements that a marriage could provide." "What kind of arrangements?" "The kind we'll discuss when we reach home." He settled back against the bench. "For now, know this. I will never mock you, Leora. Never dismiss you or treat you as less than you are. What happened today, your sister's performance, the whispers, the humiliation, it ends here. In my house, you will be respected. By the servants, by any guests we receive, by me. That is my vow to you, more binding than the ones we spoke in that chapel." Leora's throat tightened unexpectedly. She'd prepared herself for many things in this marriage: loneliness, difficulty, the challenge of caring for an invalid husband. She had not prepared for kindness, for respect, for this strange, intense man who spoke of strategy and truth in the same breath. "Thank you," she managed. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, then turned back to the window. But before he did, she caught a glimpse of something in his expression, satisfaction, perhaps, or approval. They rode in silence for the next hour as the sun completed its descent and darkness claimed the landscape. Leora found herself drowsing despite her nervousness, lulled by the rocking of the carriage and the exhaustion of the day's emotional toll. She woke with a start when the carriage slowed. "We're here," Ravian said quietly. Leora pressed her face to the window and felt her breath catch. The manor was a fortress. It rose against the night sky like something from a military campaign. High stone walls, a gatehouse with iron portcullis, towers at each corner with narrow arrow slits instead of windows. Torches blazed along the walls, and she could see figures moving, guards, she realized, patrolling the battlements. This wasn't a nobleman's country estate. This was a stronghold built to withstand siege. The carriage passed through the gatehouse, into a large courtyard. More torches here, more guards. And servants, dozens of them, lined up in perfect formation as if awaiting a king rather than a crippled duke. The carriage stopped. A servant opened the door immediately, offering his hand to help Leora descend. She stepped into the courtyard and watched as Ravian emerged behind her. He moved slowly, carefully, reaching for his cane, playing his part even here, among his own people. But then something extraordinary happened. As one, every servant in the courtyard dropped into a deep bow. Not the perfunctory nods she was used to at the Valen estate. These were bows of genuine respect, nearly reverence. Some of the guards actually knelt. And when they rose, Leora saw something in their faces that made her breath catch. Not pity. Not sympathy for their poor, broken master. Fear. Respect. And absolute, unwavering loyalty. An elderly man in the steward's livery stepped forward. "Welcome home, my lord," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtyard. Then he turned to Leora and bowed just as deeply. "Welcome, my lady. We are honored by your presence." Ravian's hand touched the small of Leora's back, guiding her forward. "Thank you, Marcus. Please see that Lady Leora's things are taken to her chambers. She's had a long day." "Of course, my lord." Marcus gestured, and servants scattered to obey. Leora let herself be guided toward the main entrance, her mind reeling. Around her, guards stood at attention, their weapons, actual weapons, swords and spears, not decorative pieces, held with the ease of men who knew how to use them. These are not the servants of a weak man, she thought, echoing her observation from 3 nights ago. These are soldiers. Guards. People who serve someone they fear and respect in equal measure. At the threshold of the fortress manor, Ravian paused and turned to her. In the torchlight, his eyes gleamed silver. "Welcome to your new home, Leora," he said quietly. "I think you'll find it rather different from what you're used to." She looked up at the towering walls, the armed guards, the servants who'd bowed like subjects before a king. Looked at her husband, who leaned on his cane but whose eyes held shadows and secrets, and something that might have been power carefully restrained. "I think," she said slowly, "you're absolutely right." And as he led her inside, Leora realized with absolute certainty that she had married no ordinary man. The only question was, who, or what, was he really? She had a feeling she was about to find out. The chambers Marcus led her to were nothing like Leora had expected. She'd prepared herself for functional spaces, clean but sparse, befitting a minor duke's northern outpost. Instead, she found rooms that would have made Lady Morgana weep with envy. The bedchamber alone was twice the size of her quarters at the Valen estate. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, rich tapestries covered the stone walls, and through an open doorway, she glimpsed a private bathing room with an actual copper tub. "If you require anything, pull this cord," Marcus said, indicating a braided rope near the bed. "Someone will come immediately." After he withdrew, Ravian appeared, still leaning on his cane. "I wanted to ensure you had everything you needed," he said, remaining near the doorway. "The rooms are beautiful," Leora said honestly. "Far more than I expected." "My chambers are in the West Tower," Ravian said. "Through that door is a sitting room that connects our apartments. You're welcome to use it, or keep it locked if you prefer privacy. Separate bedrooms, Leora said. Not quite a question. Yes. His gray eyes met hers directly. This marriage was strategic for both of us, Leora. You needed to escape from an intolerable situation. I needed a cover. Certain arrangements that marriage provides. We'll discuss the details tomorrow, when you've had time to rest. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. Rest well. We'll talk properly in the morning. Then he was gone, and Leora was alone in her unexpectedly lavish cage. She woke to darkness and sound. Rhythmic impacts, muffled by distance and stone, coming from somewhere below her chambers. A sensible woman would roll over and return to sleep. Leora had never been particularly sensible. She slipped from bed, pulled on a robe, and eased open her chamber door. The corridor was dimly lit by oil lamps. She followed the sound through twisting corridors, down into older sections where the stone was darker. The sounds grew louder. At the corridor's end, one door stood slightly ajar, light spilling through the gap. She crept closer and peered through. The training room beyond was large and empty of furniture. Weapons lined one wall. Oil lamps blazed from brackets. And in the center, Ravian moved. No cane. No limp. No careful, pained steps. He wore only dark trousers, his torso bare and mapped with scars. But beneath those scars was pure, controlled power. He worked through combat forms that were beautiful and terrifying, spinning kicks, strikes that blurred with speed, movements that spoke of decades of training. This was not a man playing at combat. This was a warrior, honed to lethal perfection. He moved like death given form and purpose. Leora stood frozen, unable to look away. The frail Duke was a lie. This deadly, powerful creature was the truth. Ravian reached for a sword and began another set of forms. The blade sang through the air, an extension of his body. He moved with it like a killer, and Leora understood that this man had killed many times. Finally, Ravian slowed and set the sword back. He stood for a moment, his back to the door, breathing deeply. Then he spoke. You should be sleeping, Leora. She froze. He turned, meeting her eyes through the gap in the door. No anger, no surprise, just resigned awareness. Go back to your chambers, he said, not unkindly. We'll speak in the morning. Leora fled. Morning arrived with cruel punctuality. A servant appeared at dawn. The Lord requests your presence for breakfast, my lady. Marcus escorted her to a small dining room in the West Tower. Ravian stood by the window, leaning on his cane, looking every inch the frail Duke. Good morning, he said pleasantly. I hope you slept well. He dismissed the servants, leaving them alone. You're more perceptive than most, he said. And braver. Most people, seeing what you saw last night, would have run screaming. Should I have? Leora asked. Perhaps. Certainly, it would have been safer. Leora set down her teacup. I think I'm already drawn in. The moment I married you. His lips curved. What you saw last night. You have no disability, Leora said flatly. You're a trained fighter. Possibly the most lethal person I've ever seen. Yes. Why the performance? I have enemies, Leora. Powerful ones who would very much like to see me dead. The frailty keeps me safe from certain attention. Makes me appear harmless beneath notice. What kind of enemies? The kind that operate in shadows. That strikes at weakness. If they believed me strongly, I would be a target. If they believe me to be broken, I'm invisible. It was truth wrapped in careful evasion. Leora could feel the gaps. You're asking me to lie, she said. To pretend I don't know what you really are. I'm asking you to be discreet. Can you do that, Leora? Can you live with truth in private and performance in public? She thought of Kalitha's mockery, of years spent invisible, of her desperate need to escape. Yes, she said. I can. Relief crossed his features. Thank you. But I have conditions. No more lies between us. In private, I want the truth. Ravian studied her, then nodded. Agreed. And I want to learn. To defend myself. To be useful. A slow smile transformed his face. You continue to surprise me, Lady Leora. Is that a yes? It's a yes. A knock interrupted them. Ravian's expression shuddered immediately. Enter. A young guard stepped in, bowing. Forgive the interruption, my lord, but there's news from the northern border. The bandit group near Thornhaven has been eliminated. All of them. The Alpha's work, they're saying. The guard caught himself, eyes darting to Leora. Forgive me, my lord. It's fine, Thomas. You're dismissed. Silence filled the room after he left. Alpha. Not Duke. Not Lord. Alpha. Leora looked at Ravian. You told no more lies. I did. Then tell me. Who are you? Really? Ravian stood, moving to the window without his cane, his gait smooth and powerful. There are truths that are dangerous to know. That puts targets on the backs of those who carry them. He turned to face her. Are you certain you want this one? Yes, she said. I'm certain. Then ask me again tomorrow. If you still want the truth after a night to consider what it might cost you, I'll give it to you. But once you know, Leora, there's no unknowing. I don't want to go back. Ask me tomorrow. It wasn't a refusal. It was a gift, time to reconsider. But Leora knew her answer wouldn't change. Tomorrow, she will ask again. And tomorrow, her entire world would change. Just who did I marry? She thought, watching him silhouetted against the window. She had a feeling that by tomorrow she'd know. Calith Valen had never been good at accepting second place. She stood at her bedroom window in the Valen estate, staring out at the manicured gardens that were slowly going to seed from lack of funds for proper groundskeepers. In her hand, she clutched a letter that had arrived that morning, a chatty missive from a friend in the Northern Territories, full of gossip and observation. You should see Duke Ravian's fortress, the letter read. I passed it on the road to my cousin's estate. It's absolutely massive, more castle than manor, really. They say he's richer than half the nobles at court combined. Your stepsister certainly landed on her feet, didn't she? Calith crumpled the letter in her fist. It was intolerable. Completely, utterly intolerable. Leora, plain, boring, utterly unremarkable Leora, had somehow secured a wealthy husband with a fortress and lands while Calith was stuck with Lord Pembroke. Oh, Pembroke was rich enough, and the match was politically advantageous. But he was also 43, balding, and had the personality of wet parchment. Their engagement was a business arrangement, nothing more. She'd consoled herself with the knowledge that at least she hadn't married a cripple. That Leora's desperation had led her to a life of nursing an invalid, which surely had to be worse than a boring but wealthy husband. Except now she was hearing rumors that contradicted that comfortable narrative. The fortress was grand. Ravian was wealthy beyond expectation. And according to her friend's letter, the servants spoke of their master with genuine respect, not the pitying tones one would use for a sickly, broken man. What if Leora had actually found something better? The thought burned like acid in Calith's stomach. She moved to her vanity, studying her reflection. Golden hair, perfect skin, the kind of beauty that made men stumble over their words. She was everything Leora wasn't. She deserved the better match, the grander life, the triumph. Not Leora. Never Leora. Her stepmother's words from last week echoed in her mind. The royal seasonal ball is in 3 weeks. Perhaps we'll see your sister there and can properly assess her new circumstances. The ball. Of course. A slow smile curved Calith's lips as an idea took shape. If Leora attended the ball, it would be the perfect opportunity. Not for assessment, for correction. For reminding both Leora and the watching nobility exactly where she belonged in the hierarchy. After all, a crippled duke might have money, but he was still broken, still weak, still utterly unsuitable. All Calith needed was to make sure everyone else remembered that too. The invitation arrived at Ravian's fortress 3 days later, delivered by royal courier. Leora held the heavy parchment, studying the elaborate calligraphy. Their Majesties request the honor of your presence at the royal seasonal ball. The date was 2 weeks away. You don't want to go, she said, watching Ravian's expression across the breakfast table. He'd asked her again that morning as promised. Asked if she still wanted the truth. She'd said yes, and he'd told her, not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand that he moved in dangerous circles, that his enemies were powerful, that exposure could be fatal. He hadn't said the words Alpha King, but she'd heard them in every careful explanation. Now he looked at the invitation with barely concealed distaste. It's too public. Too many people, too many eyes. The kind of event where maintaining the performance becomes exponentially more difficult. But we're expected to attend, Leora said. A duke and his new wife. Absence would be noted, questioned. Yes. He set down his cup with careful precision. Which is why we'll go, despite my reservations. I want to go, Leora said quietly. His eyes snapped to hers. Why? Because hiding feels like shame. Like admitting Caliph was right to mock me. She lifted her chin. I won't give her that satisfaction. Something shifted in Ravian's expression, approval, perhaps, mixed with concern. Your stepsister will be there. I know. She'll find ways to make the evening difficult. I expect nothing less. Leora met his gaze steadily. But I'm not the same woman who left the Valen estate 2 weeks ago. I'm your wife now. That means something. It does. Ravian was quiet for a moment, then nodded. We'll attend, but with conditions. Extra security. You stay within my sight at all times. And if I say we leave immediately. No questions. Agreed. I'm serious, Leora. This isn't about social embarrassment. There are people at court who would use any opportunity to strike at me. A crowded ball provides cover for all sorts of unpleasantness. The weight of his words settled over her. This was the reality of her new life, danger lurking beneath every social nicety. I understand, she said. I'll be careful. Good. He pushed back from the table. Then we have 2 weeks to prepare. The seamstress arrived from the capital 4 days later, accompanied by trunks full of fabric samples and fashion plates. Leora stood on a fitting platform in her chambers while the woman circled her, taking measurements and making thoughtful noises. Ravian had insisted on the finest dressmaker, someone whose work would ensure Leora looked every inch a duchess. The emerald silk, I think, the seamstress mused. With your coloring, it will be striking. And the cut. She sketched in the air, describing necklines and draping that made Leora blush. Isn't that rather bold? You're a married woman now, my lady. And a duchess. Bold is appropriate. The seamstress smiled. Trust me, when I'm finished, you'll outshine every woman in that ballroom. A sound from the doorway made both women turn. Ravian stood there, having entered so quietly neither had noticed. He leaned on his cane, but his eyes were fixed on Leora with an intensity that made her breath catch. The emerald silk, he said quietly. Yes, that will do perfectly. The seamstress, reading the moment with professional discretion, gathered her samples. I'll return in 3 days for the first fitting, my lady. She curtsied and slipped out, leaving them alone. Ravian moved closer, still using the cane out of habit even in private. You'll be beautiful, he said. More beautiful than any of them. I'm not beautiful, Leora said automatically. Years of being compared to Caliph had taught her that much. You are. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness. You simply haven't been seen by people with eyes worth trusting. The touch sent warmth flooding through her. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd fallen into an easy partnership, training sessions where he taught her basic self-defense, meals where they talked about everything from books to politics, comfortable silences that spoke of growing trust. But this was different. This was something more. Tell me about your childhood, she said softly, wanting to know him beyond the warrior and the strategist. Ravian's hand dropped, but he didn't retreat. Not much to tell. I was prepared for responsibility from a young age. Trained extensively. There wasn't much time for play or friendship. That sounds lonely. It was. His gray eyes held shadows. But necessary. The role I would eventually fill required sacrifices. Childhood was simply the first of many. And now I have a wife who asks uncomfortable questions and refuses to be intimidated. His lips curved. It's refreshing. I love books, Leora found herself saying. Always have. My mother had a library, small, but full of wonderful stories. After she died, I practically lived there. It was the only place I felt seen. There's a library here, Ravian said. 3rd floor, East Wing. It's yours now. Add whatever you like to it. The casual generosity made her throat tight. Thank you. They stood close, closer than propriety demanded. Leora could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the pulse beating at his throat. His eyes darkened as he looked at her, and she knew he was going to kiss her. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to retreat. She didn't. Her eyes fluttered closed as his lips brushed hers, soft and questioning, and a knock at the door shattered the moment. They sprang apart as a servant entered with fresh linens, apologizing for the interruption. By the time the girl left, the spell was broken. I should go, Ravian said, his voice rougher than usual. Let you rest. He left quickly, and Leora touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of that almost kiss. Something was building between them. Something dangerous and delicious and utterly unexpected. 300 miles south, in a tavern that catered to those who preferred not to be seen, Caliph met with a man whose name she hadn't asked for and didn't want to know. The Duke will be at the ball, she said, sliding a purse of coins across the scarred table. I want him humiliated. Publicly. Something that exposes his weakness, makes him look ridiculous. The man counted the coins with practiced efficiency. Exposing weakness. That's vague, lady. You want me to trip him? Knock away his cane? Stage a confrontation he can't handle. I want everyone to see what he really is. A broken man who has no business among the nobility. Make it memorable. Caliph's smile was sharp. His wife has gotten above herself. She needs to remember her place. And if things get messy, I don't care about being messy. I care about results. She stood, pulling her hood up. Just make sure everyone sees. That's all that matters. After she left, the man pocketed the coins and smiled to himself. Easy money, though he suspected the lady didn't realize what she was asking for. He'd heard whispers about Duke Ravian, strange whispers that suggested the man was more than he appeared. But gold was gold, and a job was a job. He'd give the lady her show. Whatever happened after that was her problem. The night before the ball, Leora couldn't sleep. She found Ravian in the library, reading by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, no surprise in his expression. Nervous? He asked. Should I be? Probably. He set down his book. Tomorrow will be dangerous, Leora. Not just socially. I need you to stay close to me at all times. Trust no one else. Not even my family? His expression hardened. Especially not them. The weight of those words settled over her. Tomorrow, she would return to the world that had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her as worthless. But she wouldn't be returning alone. She would be returning as a duchess, as Ravian's wife, as someone far more than they'd ever imagined. Let them try to mock her now. She had a feeling they'd regret it. The royal palace blazed with light. Leora had never seen anything like it. Thousands of candles illuminated the grand entrance, their flames reflecting off gilded walls and crystal chandeliers that dripped from vaulted ceilings like frozen waterfalls. Nobles in silks and jewels crowded the marble steps, a river of wealth and privilege flowing into the ballroom beyond. She stepped from the carriage, and the emerald silk gown moved with her like water. The seamstress had been right. The color brought out depths in Leora's eyes she'd never noticed, and the cut transformed her from plain to striking. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant style, woven with silver thread that caught the light. For the first time in her life, people stared at her with something other than dismissal. Ravian emerged behind her, moving slowly with his cane. He wore black again, severe and formal, the picture of a frail nobleman making his best effort. But his hand found the small of her back, warm and possessive. Steady, he murmured. Let them look. They climbed the steps together, and Leora felt eyes tracking their progress. Whispers followed in their wake, but different whispers than she was used to. These held curiosity, speculation, even appreciation. Then she saw Caliph. Her stepsister stood near the ballroom entrance, resplendent in silver and sapphire, Lord Pembroke at her side looking bored and pompous. Calipha's eyes widened as she took in Leora's appearance, and something ugly flashed across her perfect features.
Shock.
Jealousy.
Rage.
Well, Caliph said loudly enough to carry her voice like honey over poison.
Sister.
What a transformation. One almost wouldn't recognize you. Caliph. Leora inclined her head with cool politeness. How lovely to see you. Is it? Calipha's smile sharpened. She moved closer, her friends clustering behind her like elegant vultures. I was just telling Lord Pembroke about your marriage. He was so curious about Duke Ravian's condition. Ravian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Leora's back. My husband's health is none of Lord Pembroke's concern, Leora said evenly. Of course not. Though one does wonder. Calipha's eyes swept over Ravian, lingering on his cane with theatrical pity. You must be so patient, sister. Playing a nursemaid can't be easy, especially for a new bride. Tell me, has married life been everything you hoped for? The implication dripped like venom. Several nobles nearby turned to listen, scenting gossip. Leora felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. Marriage has exceeded my expectations in every way. How generous you are, Caliph purred. Marrying for money and pretending it's something more. Though I suppose when options are limited, one takes what one can get. Even if it means a wedding night that's more companionable than passionate. Gasps and titters rippled through the crowd. Lord Pembroke chuckled wetly. Ravian's cane shifted slightly, his knuckles white around the handle. Leora glanced at him and saw something terrifying in his eyes. Rage. Cold and controlled, like ice over deep water. His jaw was so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Careful, Caliph, Leora said quietly. Some insults have consequences. Do they? Caliph laughed. What will you do? Have your crippled husband challenge me to? That's enough. Ravian's voice was soft but cut like a blade. Every noble within earshot fell silent. My wife has been nothing but gracious to you. Perhaps you might extend the same courtesy. Calipha's smile faltered for just an instant. Then she recovered, touching Ravian's arm with false sympathy. Of course, forgive me. I forget how sensitive these situations can be. Come, Leora, let me show you where the ladies' retiring room is. You look flushed. Before Leora could refuse, a servant appeared at her elbow. My lady, the young man said, bowing. Forgive me, but there's been an accident. Wine on your hem. He gestured to a small stain Leora hadn't noticed. Please, let me show you where you can attend to it before it sets. Leora glanced at Ravian uncertainly. I'll wait here, he said, but she saw a warning in his eyes. Stay close. It will only take a moment, the servant insisted, already moving. Flustered by the crowd's attention and eager to escape Calipha's mockery, Leora followed. They moved through the ballroom, then down a side corridor. Then another. The music and laughter faded behind them, replaced by silence that made Leora's instincts scream warning. This seems rather far, she began. The servant's hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her forward into a darkened room. 3 men waited inside. Leora's training, 2 weeks of Ravian's patient instruction, kicked in instantly. She twisted free, bringing her heel down hard on the false servant's instep. He yelped, and she ran for the door. A hand caught her hair, pulling her back. She spun, fingers clawed, catching one attacker across the face. Another grabbed her from behind, arms like iron bands around her waist. Easy now, a rough voice said in her ear. Lady Caliph just wants some evidence. A few torn clothes, some scratches, maybe a witness or 2. Ruin your reputation nice and proper. Don't make it harder then. The door exploded inward. Ravian stood in the doorway, and the cane was gone. He moved like death itself, swift, brutal, efficient. The first man went down with a sickening crack, Ravian's fist crushing his jaw. The second lunged with a knife and found himself disarmed, his arm bent at an impossible angle, screaming. The man holding Leora released her and drew a sword, but Ravian was already there. He caught the blade with his bare hand, and twisted. Metal shrieked. The sword clattered away, and Ravian's other hand closed around the man's throat. "You touched my wife," Ravian said, his voice utterly cold.
His eyes.
Leora stared. His eyes were glowing, silver-bright in the darkness, and there was something inhuman in his face. Something predatory and ancient and absolutely terrifying. The man in his grip made a choking sound. "Ravian," Leora whispered. He looked at her, and for a heartbeat, she saw the monster beneath the mask. Then he released the attacker, who collapsed gasping. "What are you?" Leora breathed. Ravian turned to her fully, and despite everything, his voice was gentle. "Someone who protects what's his." Shouts echoed from the corridor. Guards burst into the room, swords drawn, summoned by the screams and commotion. Among them was a tall man in the ornate armor of the Royal Guard captain. He took one look at the scene, the fallen attackers, Ravian standing without his cane, eyes still faintly glowing, and dropped to one knee. "Alpha King," he said, his voice carrying absolute deference. The other guards immediately followed suit, kneeling. The room spun. Leora grabbed the wall for support. "Alpha King." Those two words rewrote everything. Every careful explanation. Every partial truth. Her husband wasn't just a duke. Wasn't just a warrior pretending weakness. He was the Alpha King. The ruler of all shifter territories. The most powerful being in the realm. And she'd married him, without knowing. Ravian turned to her, his eyes fading back to gray, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Behind him, Kalith appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Her face went white as she took in the scene, the guards kneeling, the attackers groaning on the floor, Ravian standing tall and powerful and absolutely nothing like the cripple she'd mocked. Understanding and horror dawned on her perfect features. Leora looked at her stepsister, at the guards, at her husband who was a king. "Yes," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the world crumbling and reforming around her. "I think we do." The royal chambers felt more like a war room than royal apartments. Maps covered the walls, documents stacked on a massive desk, weapons hung in careful arrangement. Ravian locked the door and let the mask fall completely. His posture straightened, the fragility vanished. He poured 2 glasses of wine with steady hands.
"Sit," he said.
"Please." Leora sat because her legs felt uncertain. Her mind was still reeling from what she'd witnessed. "Alpha King." "My name is Darius Ravian," he said quietly. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Realms. I've ruled for 12 years, and for 12 years, I've maintained a careful deception." "The Duke," Leora whispered. "Duke Ravian is a real title I inherited. But I exaggerated his condition, his weakness. Created a persona that could move through noble circles without being recognized as the king. My enemies believe the Alpha King never leaves his northern stronghold. They watch for a powerful figure, not a crippled duke. So you've been hiding in plain sight. It's kept me alive and my kingdom secure. Allowed me to identify traitors, uncover plots." His gray eyes held hers. "But yes, I lied to you. You let me marry you without knowing. I protected you. The fewer who know the truth, the safer they are. If I told you before, you would have become a target immediately." His expression softened. "I couldn't do that to you." Leora stood, needing to move. Her husband was the Alpha King, the most powerful shifter in the realm. The man Kalith had mocked, that she'd thought broken. She'd married a king without knowing it. "Kalith had no idea," she said suddenly. "No one did. That was the point." A bitter laugh escaped her. "She mocked you, called you a cripple, and now she knows." "The guards who responded are loyal. They'll keep the secret." Ravian moved closer. "But yes, your stepsister knows now. As do the men who attacked you." "Why did they attack me?" His expression hardened. He moved to the desk, pulling out a marked map. I have enemies who want my throne, lords who believe they could rule better. For years, they've searched for weaknesses. And tonight wasn't random. Those men were hired specifically to target you, to create scandal. Someone knew you were important to me. But how? We've barely been married for 3 weeks. Which means someone's been watching carefully. Someone who knows or suspects my true identity. Genuine concern filled his eyes. This wasn't about your stepsister's jealousy. She was a pawn. The real enemy is still hidden. The implications chilled her. Someone at court knows who you are. Someone is getting close. And they're testing, probing for weaknesses. His jaw tightened. I won't let them use you. You should have told me, Leora said finally. I know. And I'm sorry. Ravian knelt beside her chair. I'm not asking immediate forgiveness. But I am asking you to understand why I made these choices. She looked at him, really looked. Saw the weight he carried, the constant vigilance, the loneliness of never being able to trust anyone with his full truth. You're the Alpha King, she said softly. Yes. Which makes me my queen, if you choose to be. The weight settled over her. Queen of all shifter territories. You married a crippled duke, Ravian said quietly. Not an Alpha King with a target on his back. I'll understand if you want to leave. I can arrange for the marriage to be dissolved, provide you with funds and a safe place. Leora studied his face, the strong jaw, the gray eyes, the scars from battles fought to protect his kingdom. She thought of her journey from invisible stepdaughter to this moment. Thought of the man she'd come to know over the past weeks. She'd fallen for him. Somewhere between the training sessions and quiet conversations, she'd fallen for the man beneath all the masks. Not the king. The man. I didn't marry you for power, she said. I married you for escape, for a chance at something different. And I found someone worth staying for. Not because you're a king, but because you're you. Hope flickered in his expression. I won't leave you because of this, Leora continued. But no more lies between us. No more secrets. If we're facing these enemies together, I need to know everything. Everything, he agreed, voice rough with emotion. I promise. He reached for her hand, thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Thank you, he said quietly. For staying. For choosing me, even knowing the cost. Urgent knocking shattered the moment. Ravian moved to the door, hand on a weapon. Enter. Marcus burst in, breathing hard. My lord, there's been a development. Lady Calith has been arrested. She confessed to hiring the attackers. And she claims someone contacted her. Someone who suggested targeting your wife, who provided funds and detailed information about the ball. Marcus's expression was grim. But my lord, the information they had, things only someone with access to inner court circles would know. Silence filled the chamber. There's a traitor close to the throne, Leora said quietly. Ravian nodded slowly.
Yes.
And they're dangerous. He turned to Marcus. Double the guard. Identify everyone who had access to those plans. And bring Lady Calith to me. After Marcus left, Ravian looked at Leora. This is what you're choosing, he said. Enemies in shadows. Constant danger. Leora stood, straightening her shoulders. Then we'd better find them before they strike again. A slow smile spread across his face. I like the sound of that. So do I. Outside, the ball continued, unaware that above them, a queen had chosen her throne. And the real game was only beginning. The palace dungeon was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom above. Leora descended the stone steps with Marcus at her side, ignoring Ravian's objections. She needed to see Calith, needed to understand how deep this conspiracy ran. Her stepsister huddled in a cell at the corridor's end, still wearing the silver gown from the ball, now torn and stained. Her perfect hair hung in tangles, her face blotchy from crying. When she saw Leora, disbelief and rage warred on her features. You, Calith hissed. This is your fault. You got me arrested. You got yourself arrested when you hired thugs to attack me. I didn't know they would attack you. I just wanted. Calith's voice broke. You married the Alpha King? It's impossible. You're nothing. The words should have stung. Once, they would have. But Leora stood straighter, meeting her stepsister's eyes with new confidence. I was never nothing, Calith. You just needed me to be, so you could feel superior. Leora moved closer to the bars. Tell me about Lord Theron. Calith's eyes widened. How did you? Tell me. Her stepsister crumpled, sinking onto the cell's narrow bench. He approached me a month ago. Said he'd heard about your marriage, thought it was amusing. Suggested we orchestrate a little humiliation at the ball. He provided the gold, the contacts, the plan. Her voice turned bitter. He said it would just be embarrassing. Spilled wine, a staged argument, maybe some witnesses to marital discord. Nothing violent. But you didn't question why a lord you barely knew would fund such a scheme? I thought. Calith's voice broke. I thought he found it entertaining. That he was doing me a favor, because he also thought you'd gotten above yourself. She looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. I didn't know about the attack. I swear it. When I heard what those men tried to do, despite everything, Leora saw the truth in her stepsister's expression. Calith was vain, cruel, petty, but not murderous. She'd been a pawn, manipulated by someone far more dangerous. You're a fool, Leora said quietly. But perhaps not a villain. What's going to happen to me? That depends on what happens next. Leora turned to leave, then paused. You spent years making me feel worthless, Calith. But you were wrong. You were always wrong. She left her stepsister weeping in the cell. The war room was filled with Ravian's most trusted advisors, Marcus, the Royal Guard captain, and 3 others Leora hadn't met before. They fell silent as she entered. Ravian stood at the head of the table, a map spread before him. Lord Theron, he said without preamble. Minor noble with claims to territories in the western reaches. He's been building alliances for years, quietly gathering support among lords who resent my authority. Why target Leora? The guard captain asked. To test me, to see if the Duke and the King are the same person. Ravian's finger traced a line on the map. If I responded as the King, my dual identity would be exposed. If I didn't respond, I'd appear weak, incapable of protecting my own wife. A clever trap, Marcus observed. But he miscalculated, Ravian said, glancing at Leora. He didn't expect my wife to be capable of defending herself, or that I'd risk partial exposure to protect her. So, what's our next move? Leora asked, stepping forward to the table. Several advisors exchanged glances. Ravian's lips curved slightly. Our move?
Yes.
I'm part of this now, whether you like it or not. And I can help. Leora. I won't be a protected, useless wife sitting in a tower while you fight battles. She met his eyes steadily. Use me. I can move in circles you can't, hear conversations that are silent when you enter rooms. Let me be useful. Ravian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then you'll need proper training. The next 2 weeks blurred together in an intensive education unlike anything Leora had experienced. Mornings were physical training. Ravian pushed her harder now, teaching her not just to defend but to attack, to read opponents, to turn weakness into advantage. She learned knife work, pressure points, and how to kill quickly if necessary. Again, Ravian said as she stumbled through a complex sequence. And keep your weight centered. She reset, launched into the movement. This time, her blade stopped precisely at his throat. Better, he said, with genuine approval in his voice. You're a fast learner. Afternoons were court politics and strategy. Marcus taught her to read the subtle hierarchies of noble society, to identify alliances through seating arrangements and casual conversation. She learned which families held real power versus those clinging to fading glory, which lords were loyal and which merely performed loyalty. Evenings belonged to her and Ravian alone. Tell me about your father, she asked one night as they reviewed documents together. Ravian was quiet for a moment. He was a good king but a hard man. He believed in strength above all else, in ruling through power and fear. He set down his pen. I've tried to be different, to rule with strategy as much as strength. It's working, is it? His gray eyes met hers. Sometimes I wonder if all this deception makes me weak. If my father would be ashamed. Leora reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Your father's way got him killed by conspirators when he was 45. You've survived 12 years through intelligence and careful planning. That's not a weakness. That's wisdom. Something shifted in his expression. He stood, moving around the table to her, and pulled her to her feet. When did you become so essential to me? He murmured. Somewhere between the wedding and the attempted kidnapping. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his usually serious face. Then his hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing her lips. Leora, he said softly, I'm going to kiss you now. If you don't want. She rose on her toes and closed the distance herself. The kiss was nothing like the chaste brush at their wedding. This was heat and hunger, his hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ravian pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, he said simply. Not the convenient wife, not the strategic alliance. You. I love you too, Leora whispered. My king. Just Darius. Here, in private, I'm just Darius. Then I love you, Darius. The court function 2 days later was a smaller affair, a diplomatic reception for visiting dignitaries. Ravian played his part perfectly, the frail duke leaning on his cane, speaking in soft tones. Leora remained at his side, the devoted wife, solicitous and proper. Caliph had been forgiven and sent home, though Leora knew guards watched her every move. Lord Theron was present, a corpulent man with shrewd eyes and an easy smile. He approached them with false sympathy. Duke Ravian, Lady Leora. I heard about the unfortunate incident at the ball. Robbers in the palace, how shocking. Indeed, Ravian said mildly. But my wife was unharmed, thank the gods. Your wife is braver than most, Theron said, his eyes assessing. Not many women would have fought back so effectively. Leora smiled demurely. My husband has been teaching me self-defense. These are dangerous times. So they are. As the evening progressed, Leora watched and listened. Noted who spoke to Theron, who avoided him. Observed the subtle deferences, the meaningful glances. 3 lords in particular clustered around him. Lords Pemberton, Ashford, and Crane. All with military backgrounds. All positioned in strategic territories. She catalogued every detail, playing the simple wife, while her mind worked like the strategist Ravian had been training. When they finally returned to their chambers, she spread out a rough map and marked positions. Theron's alliance is larger than we thought, she said. At least 8 houses, maybe more. And they're positioned to control supply routes if they move against you. Ravian studied her markings, his expression growing serious. You're right. This is more than a minor conspiracy. You're a natural queen, he said, looking at her with unmistakable pride and love. Before she could respond, urgent knocking interrupted. Marcus entered, his face grim. My lord, there's news. Lord Theron has made a formal challenge. He's called for the Alpha King to show himself publicly or be declared unfit to rule. He's claiming the king is a myth, that you've been ruling through proxies and deception. Silence filled the room. The other lords? Ravian asked. Divided. Some support him. Others are waiting to see what happens. Ravian's jaw tightened. How long do I have? He's demanded a response within 3 days. The dual identity couldn't be maintained much longer. The careful deception that had protected Ravian for 12 years was crumbling. He looked at Leora. It seems we're out of time. She straightened her shoulders. Then we'd better make these 3 days count. The council chamber filled before dawn, Ravian's most trusted advisors gathering in tense silence. Lord Theron's challenge has support, Marcus reported, laying documents on the table. 6 major houses have publicly backed his demand. Another dozen are wavering. He's forcing your hand, the guard captain said. Reveal yourself or lose the throne by default. Ravian stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the capital. The dual identity was always temporary. I knew that. He turned to face them. The question is how we reveal the truth, on our terms or his. Reveal it on our terms, Leora said firmly. She'd been quiet until now, listening, learning. At the Grand Council in 3 days. Make it official, public, undeniable. The Grand Council is exactly where Theron wants this confrontation, an advisor objected. Which is why we'll be ready for him. Leora moved to the table, pointing to the map she'd marked the previous night. He's positioned his allies strategically, but he's also exposed them.
We know who they are now.
That's an advantage. Ravian studied her with something like wonder. What are you proposing? We gather evidence of his conspiracy. Present it publicly when you reveal yourself. Show the council that Theron isn't a concerned lord seeking accountability. He's a traitor attempting a coup. The evidence would need to be irrefutable, Marcus said. Then we have 3 days to make it so. Ravian's lips curved. Very well. We do this together. The advisors dispersed to their tasks. Leora turned to leave, but Ravian caught her hand. This will be dangerous, he said quietly. Theron won't wait passively. He'll make a move before the council. I know. Promise me you'll be careful. She squeezed his hand. Only if you promise the same. The attack came on the second night. Leora woke to the sound of breaking glass. Training took over. She rolled from bed, grabbed the knife Ravian had insisted she keep close, and moved to the wall. The window shattered inward. 3 figures in black dropped into her chamber. She didn't scream, didn't freeze. The weeks of training crystallized into action. The first attacker lunged. She sidestepped, her blade finding the gap in his armor just as Ravian had taught her. He went down with a grunt. The second was faster, his sword already drawn. Steel clashed against her small knife. She was outmatched in reach and strength, forced back toward the bed. Then the connecting door exploded open. Ravian entered like a storm. No cane, no pretense, pure lethal power. He moved between Leora and her attacker, disarming the man with brutal efficiency. The third assassin tried to flee through the window and found the guard captain blocking his escape. Within moments, all 3 were subdued, bleeding on the floor. Ravian turned to Leora, his eyes scanning her for injury. Are you hurt?
No.
I'm fine. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him trembling slightly. When I heard the glass break. I know. But I'm all right. We're all right. Marcus arrived with more guards. My lord, we caught a 4th one in the corridor. They came through the servant passages. Ravian's expression turned cold. Interrogate them. I want to know who sent them, and what else Theron has planned. As the prisoners were dragged away, Leora noticed something. One assassin's sleeve had ridden up, revealing a tattoo, a wolf's head encircled by thorns. That marking, she said. I've seen it before. Where? At the reception. Lord Ashford's guards wore pins with the same design. Ravian's eyes narrowed. Ashford is one of Theron's known allies. But hiring assassins is bold, even for a conspirator. Or desperate, Leora said. Maybe they know we're gathering evidence. Maybe they're trying to eliminate threats before the council. Then we need to move faster. The next day brought confirmation. Under interrogation, one assassin broke, revealing that Lord Ashford had hired them on Theron's orders. The target had been Leora. Removing her would destabilize Ravian emotionally, making him vulnerable. They're right, Ravian said quietly that evening. They stood in his study, documents spread around them. Losing you would destroy me. You've become. He paused, searching for words. Everything. Leora moved into his arms. You're not losing me. But we need to end this before they try again. Tomorrow, Ravian said. At the Grand Council. I reveal everything, present the evidence, and force Theron's hand. And if he doesn't back down? Ravian's expression hardened. Then I deal with him as an Alpha King deals with traitors. She saw the predator behind his eyes, the ancient power he usually kept leashed. No mercy? No mercy. They stood together in the lamplight, and Leora understood fully what she'd chosen. Not just a husband, not just a king, but a warrior who would do whatever was necessary to protect his kingdom and his queen. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too." He kissed her, deep and claiming. Tomorrow changes everything. The frail duke dies. The Alpha King emerges. And there's no going back. I don't want to go back. Neither do I. The Grand Council chamber was filled to capacity. Every major house had sent representatives. Tension crackled through the air like lightning waiting to strike. Lord Theron stood at the center, confident and smiling. He'd positioned his allies strategically around the chamber. Ravian entered last, still playing the duke, leaning on his cane. Leora walked beside him, regal in emerald silk. Whispers followed their progress to the high seats. Theron stepped forward, his voice carrying through the chamber. "My lords and ladies, we gather today to address a crisis of leadership. For 12 years, we've been ruled by a phantom, an Alpha King who never shows his face, who governs through shadows and intermediaries. I say this is unacceptable. I demand the Alpha King appear before this council, or be declared unfit to rule." Murmurs of agreement rippled through Theron's supporters. Furthermore, Theron continued, "I submit that the king is a myth, a fiction created to control us. And I propose new leadership, a council of lords to govern in his absence." More murmurs, louder now. Ravian stood slowly, setting aside his cane. The simple gesture silenced the chamber. "You demand the Alpha King show himself?" His voice had changed, deeper, resonant with power that made the air vibrate. "Very well." He straightened fully, shoulders back, and the frail duke vanished. In his place stood something else entirely, tall, powerful, radiating authority that made people instinctively bow their heads. "I am Darius Ravian," he said, his eyes beginning to glow silver. "Duke of the northern borders and Alpha King of these realms. And Lord Theron, you are a traitor." The chamber erupted. Theron's face went white, then red. "Lies. This is deception." "Is it?" Ravian gestured, and Marcus stepped forward with documents. "I have evidence of your conspiracy. Assassination attempts, treasonous correspondence, hired mercenaries. Shall I read them aloud?" "This is fabricated. The assassins you sent to kill my wife have confessed. Your ally Lord Ashford is in custody. Your plot is exposed." Theron's hand moved to his sword. Around the chamber, his allies did the same. "Then we do this the hard way," Theron snarled. Steel rang as swords were drawn. The chamber descended into chaos. And Ravian, no longer hiding, let his true power show. His eyes blazed silver. His presence expanded, filling the space with crushing authority that made weaker shifters drop to their knees. "I am your king," he said, his voice carrying supernatural weight. "Challenge me if you dare." Theron lunged. The real battle had begun. Ravian's power filled the Grand Council chamber like a physical force. His transformation wasn't complete. He didn't shift fully into wolf form. But his eyes blazed pure silver, his presence expanded until it pressed against every person in the room, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Darius Ravian, Duke of the Northern Border, and Alpha King of this realm." His gaze swept the assembly, and nobles flinched under its intensity. "For 12 years, I have walked among you, seen your true faces, identified those loyal and those treacherous." The chamber erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Some nobles dropped immediately to their knees, recognizing true alpha power. Others stood frozen, uncertain. Theron's face had gone from white to purple with rage. "This is deception. Trickery. You cannot." "Cannot what?" Ravian's voice cut like a blade. "Rule my own kingdom? Protect my people from traitors like you? I am no traitor. I sought accountability. You sought my throne." Ravian descended from the dais, moving with predatory grace. "You hired assassins to murder my wife. You conspired to overthrow legitimate rule. You are a traitor, Lord Theron. And you will answer for it." "Lies." Theron's hand went to his sword. I have proof of nothing. Then allow me to provide it, Leora said, stepping forward. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. She felt the weight of their stares, shock, curiosity, some lingering dismissal. But she stood straight, chin raised, channeling every lesson Ravian had taught her. Lord Theron approached my stepsister 4 weeks ago, she said, her voice clear and steady. He provided gold and detailed information to stage an attack at the royal ball. When that failed, he sent assassins to our chambers 2 nights ago. She gestured, and guards brought forward the captured men. These assassins bear the mark of Lord Ashford's personal guard. Under interrogation, they confessed to being hired by Theron's conspiracy. The word of criminals means nothing, Theron started. Then perhaps you'll give more weight to this. Marcus stepped forward with a ledger. Financial records seized from Lord Ashford's estate. Payments made to known mercenaries. Correspondence outlining plans to destabilize the throne. He opened the book. Shall I read the passage where you discuss the best methods to kill an Alpha King? Theron's face went ashen. Around the chamber, his allies began to shift nervously. One by one, they dropped to their knees before Ravian, abandoning their conspirator. Cowards! Theron spat. You swore loyalty. To the Alpha King, Lord Pemberton said, his head bowed. Not to a traitor's failed coup. Theron drew his sword in desperation. Then I challenge you, Ravian. Single combat, as is my right. Ravian moved faster than human eyes could follow. One moment Theron held a weapon. The next he was on his knees, his sword clattering across the floor, Ravian's hand at his throat. You have no rights, Ravian said softly, dangerously. You are a traitor, and your house is finished. He released Theron, who collapsed gasping. Guards seized him immediately. Lord Theron is stripped of all titles and lands, Ravian declared. His house is dissolved. His co-conspirators will face trial. His silver eyes swept the assembly. Let this be a lesson. I am not a phantom. I am not a myth. I am your king, and I will protect this realm from all threats, internal or external. The chamber fell silent, then erupted in pledges of loyalty as nobles knelt en masse. When order was finally restored, Ravian addressed the assembly again. Some of you question why I maintain this deception, he said, his voice calmer now but no less commanding. You wonder why your king hid among you, as a crippled duke.
He paused.
I did it to see you clearly, to identify threats before they could solidify, to move freely through circles that would have closed to an obvious king. He turned, extending his hand to Leora. She took it, joining him at the center of the chamber. This is Queen Leora, Ravian said, and the formal title made her breath catch. She knew me as a crippled duke and chose me anyway. She stood against assassins at my side. She uncovered this conspiracy through her own intelligence and courage. She is worthy of your loyalty, your respect, and your obedience. Leora felt hundreds of eyes on her. Some nobles bowed with genuine respect, others with political calculation, but all of them bowed. Ravian looked at her, silently offering her the floor. Leora took a breath and addressed the assembly. Many of you knew me as the overlooked daughter of a minor house. Some of you mocked my marriage, pitted my choices, assumed I'd settled for scraps. Her voice strengthened. But I learned something these past weeks. True strength isn't in appearances. It's not in titles or beauty or the performance of power. It's in character, in courage, in the choices we make when no one is watching. She met the eyes of those who'd laughed at her wedding. Look beyond surfaces. See people clearly. Because the crippled duke you dismissed is your king, and the plain wife you pitted is your queen. Silence, then genuine applause rippled through the chamber. Ravian's fingers tightened around hers, pride evident in his expression. The Grand Council had accepted them. Together. 3 days later, Leora returned to the Valen estate. She arrived in a royal carriage, with guards bearing the Alpha King's insignia. The servants who'd once ignored her now bowed deeply. Lord Valen and Lady Morgana waited in the entry hall, their faces pale with anxiety. Caliph stood apart, her golden beauty dimmed by shame and fear. Her engagement to Lord Pembroke had been dissolved the moment the scandal broke. She was ruined socially, financially dependent on a father who could barely meet his own debts. "Your Majesty," Lord Valen said, the title awkward on his tongue. "We are honored." "Don't," Leora said quietly. "Don't pretend this is an honor. We both know what this is." Her father's face flushed. Lady Morgana stared at the floor. Leora turned to Caliph, who met her eyes with surprising defiance despite the tears on her cheeks. "You taught me I was worthless," Leora said. "You mocked me, dismissed me, treated me as less than nothing. You were wrong." She paused. "But I won't become cruel like you." Calitha's defiance crumbled. "Then what will you do to me?" "You'll be sent to a northern monastery. Not as punishment, but to learn humility, to understand that beauty and birth don't make you superior." Leora's voice was firm but not unkind. "Perhaps you'll find something there worth more than cruelty." She turned to her father. "Your estate's debts are forgiven. This is the last generosity you'll receive from me. Use it wisely." Lord Valen nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Leora walked out of the estate without looking back. She'd said what needed saying. Given grace where she could have dealt justice. That would have to be enough. A week later, Leora stood in the library of their manor, now officially recognized as the Northern Royal Palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the kingdom. Shelves lined every wall, filled with books Ravian had acquired for her. It was her sanctuary, her personal domain. She opened her journal and began to write. "When your family mocks you for marrying a crippled man, remember this: appearances are the grandest deceptions. They saw weakness, I saw a man. They heard silence, I heard strategy. They laughed at a cripple, I married a king. But more than that, I found a partner, an equal, a love that didn't need a crown to be worthy." The door opened softly. She didn't need to look to know who entered. Ravian crossed the library without his cane, moving with the fluid grace that was his true nature. He came up behind her, arms encircling her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "Writing our story?" he asked. "Our beginning," she corrected. "We have a long way to go still." "We do, but we'll go together." He turned her in his arms, and she saw everything in his eyes: love, respect, partnership. "You saved me, you know, in more ways than you realize." "We saved each other," Leora said, touching his face. "That's what partners do." "My queen," he murmured and kissed her. Through the window, the kingdom spread before them. Their kingdom now, to protect and rule together. Challenges would come. Enemies would rise. But they would face everything as they'd faced Theron's conspiracy. Together. Ravian pulled back slightly, his hand moving to rest on her stomach with gentle reverence. "And soon, we'll have an heir to protect as well." Leora's breath caught. "You know, I suspected." The physician confirmed it this morning. His smile was radiant. "We're having a child, Leora." Joy flooded through her, bright and overwhelming. A child. An heir. A future beyond anything she'd imagined in that cold dining hall where Caliph had laughed at her choices. "Let them laugh," she whispered, echoing her thoughts from that night. "We have the last word." "We do," Ravian agreed, pulling her close. Together. And standing in their library, in their palace, with their kingdom spread before them and their child growing within her, Leora understood that she'd found something infinitely more valuable than revenge or vindication. She'd found home.
Love. Partnership.
Purpose. She'd found everything. The end.